Thanks for staying with us. You're watching Daybreak. The hashtag on X is Citizen Daybreak. The SMS code is 22422 at Citizen TV Kenya and at Ayub Abdikadir. Yusuf Chanzu is former lawmaker. Mule Musau is a coordinator with the Election Observation Group, ELOG. We're also joined by the very Reverend Canon Evans Omolo, Provost at the All Saints Cathedral, and Steve Ogola, Council, here joining us this morning to take stock of what's happening in the country. Steve, I was on you. And certainly we talked about manifesto before even how consequential the elections will be next year. Give us a sense of then what's expected of a technocratic cabinet that largely has been taken out of Parliament and the constitutional dispensation that we have, and the statements that we have been hearing from them largely across the country.
Well, the explanation is already grounded in the law.
Yeah.
If you look at Article 77, sub-Article 2 of the Constitution, it expressly prohibits participation of cabinet secretaries in politics, and that is also articulated in Section 23 of the Leadership and Integrity Act. Again, the election offences prohibits use of public resources to promote the candidature of a particular individual. So, strictly speaking, the cabinet secretaries must not be using those offices or be seen to be using those offices to advance the re-election of the president. What they have done, which is a clever maneuver or a clever attempt to outmaneuver the rigors of the law, is to use those offices as part of a broader campaign to mainstream government work. So that they can do. But it is demoralizing, Ayub, to see CSs take to podiums publicly and make statements that exclude the rest of the political class. Because if a CS takes an aggressive political posture and proclaims two-term, and yet he holds a state office that is intended to serve others, he may inadvertently make those people who are trying to dislodge, this is political competition and it's allowed, he may inadvertently exclude those who are trying to dislodge this administration from power. It also may also mean that if you're not aligned politically to the views that are being exposed by that cabinet secretary, then you would risk being locked out of development projects. So that is the law. There is a terrible disjunction between the law and reality. In reality, however, is that CSs just campaign freely. They campaign freely and openly because there's no consequence. I've said, the problem of early campaigns, most of the time, is always triggered, as Provost said, by the political administration in power. Because then that leaves the political opposition questioning the rationale for restraining themselves when the incumbent is already using the advantage of incumbency to break ahead. Then they also join the fray and they start campaigning. The problem then is, in that unhealthy competition, service delivery is then compromised. And it has the unintended consequence of undermining the government in power's ability to get re-elected, because then you get sacked in political campaigns year long instead of focusing on political delivery. There was a time the World Bank no longer does those reports, but the World Bank did a report in 2012, what they call devolution without disruption. In that report, they highlighted something very significant. They said, as political campaigns, the political season sets in, priorities begin to change, and the executive wing of government at the national and county level begin to prioritize projects that are more visible and more likely to get them re-elected, even if there is no real impact in the lives of Kenyans. And that is something we need to watch out as Kenyans. And I think, Ayub, I'm an advocate, and I can tell you, I want to urge Kenyans to reduce reliance on the law as the pathway to problem solving. The Provost is here. He should be telling us more how to deepen our commitment to certain values. The Article 10 of the Constitution already signals certain what we call as principles, national values and principles of governance. How about we recenter the conversation around a value system? How about we recenter the conversation around extra-legal tools that do not corner us to read a particular provision of the law. Because when you read a particular provision of the law, another parallel reading can come and say, well, the court has interpreted Article 77, Sub-Article 2 in a more permissive manner. Then we lose the broader conversation of, look, as a country, we need to be grounded on what we consider as our shared and settled understanding of what our priorities are. Right. Our priorities are, there should be transparency and accountability in the manner in which we govern. There should be service delivery. So whatever we do must be promoting cohesion, must be promoting service delivery, must be enhancing accountability without referencing Ayub. Those actions as having been grounded in a particular provision of the law. Over-reliance of the law, over legislation, has proven in our more than 15 years since 2010 that the law itself has very notable and visible limits. And the limits of formal law only means that if we continue deepening our commitment, if we continue relying on the law, we will miss opportunity to reflect on certain value systems that can complement the gaps that otherwise exist in the law. Yeah, and you talked about, you mentioned, you have brought up a very profound point of this leading to class divisions, or pro against, supporters for or against the government. But Yusuf, coming to you, it certainly makes easy, because ideally the government is mandated to serve all Kenyans. But then is it not concerning when a cabinet minister campaigns and isolates a region, say, for instance, and therefore service delivery becomes for some Kenyans a privilege and for others a right, which ideally should be an all-encompassing right for Kenyans to get services?
Yeah, just like I said earlier, and I think like this contribution, because it's a very interesting subject. Yeah. And, there's somebody who said, what you think is common sense. It's not common sense. But I still believe that the setup that we have is very interesting to me. When I see some of the cabinet secretaries, the way they behave, sometimes I miss the earlier situation where we had people being elected. Somebody goes around, like you campaign in your area, and you tell people what you think, and you prove yourself publicly, and then from there, when you are elected, then out of that, a few of them are selected to form the cabinet. Because what has been happening, and when I was here last time, the question that came up, and that is still a major question, it was about education, about the fact that the budget now is at 700 billion. The question I was being asked was whether that money is sufficient or not. But I was still going around the issue of the Constitution. Now, I've been looking at a very simple issue. When you are, like you now here, you guys, you got this job of doing what you do, and I keep on praising this station. I really praise Macharia for coming up with this and having people like you guys to run it this way. Because you're an expert in this, but you don't do it all the time. You time yourself when you are going to do it. Like you find, what I saw very pathetic recently, and I think it's still going on, this thing of children qualifying to go to school. Yeah. And you find, I saw somewhere within Thika area and so on, the schools were full. The gates were closed. The parents were coming and they were insisting they must open for them to admit the children. And you go to other places, there were no children in school. And that's the time when I was expecting that someone like the minister and the PS should just leave the office and go and see what is happening and come back and give instructions. And they are not doing that until we had to say it one time. I had to say it to the president that, this, the ministers, the CSS, everybody sitting in the office. Mm-hmm. Now, when it comes now to going to make addresses in public, now they want to go and do that. You are not being fair to Kenyans because it's being done. But you see, if it had gone out, in fact, what people only need, you see, like now, I can just refer here. The person who manages this place, he doesn't have to be in every room. Yeah. But there's something that he has done.
Structures.
Yeah, for you people to be able to know that this time, you see, like me when I was told 6:30, although I got the information late, that thing has made me, because when I was taking Daku in the morning, I just had to pray and come. So, if you know in advance what you are going to do, and the schools, that's an area where there is a very serious issue.
Okay.
I found another one again, which I find, and I don't know whether my colleagues understand this. The reason why we came up with devolution, it started up with this thing of somebody, all of us coming from all over the country, and saying that somebody who is in treasury, when he's sharing out money, he cannot be able to know what is happening in Mararal, in the villages, what is happening in Kisumu, and so on. So we said, let us take these resources there. And we were expecting the poor are going to manage these resources. We are going to be fair to everybody. That's how we came up with the county issues. Okay. So even to the extent that we are now having the head office going to a county like Kisumu or Kakamega to go and do that, and we have got a governor's office, which is a whole government. It's a mystery. And this is why I'm saying that to the lawyers that I think we need to look at this constitution again. Okay. And in a sober mind, not when there is push and pull, okay, the way it has happened. Right. Because you see that time, it was the word of, I'm sorry about, Raila worked very hard. But it was that force that put us in this. So we got it when there was a lot of antagonism. Yeah, okay. Let me tell you the last thing. Yes. There's something that many Kenyans don't know. The running of government became expensive that time. If you remember, President Kibaki had formed a government of 22 cabinet ministers. When Anani came and he said that they share power, we had to get an additional 24 ministers. That became 44.
Plus the assistant ministers.
Yes, now, today, you have got more than 50 PSs. Do you know that? And with the attendant expenses, in fact, I don't know who was talking about. I don't know whether he has talked about it, because there are so many things that we are listening to. Somebody having a fleet of vehicles.
An entire convoy of vehicles.
These are the things that I think we need. Yeah. And I think the church, you need to help us, because there's a time when we had a problem. Which year was it? And I think it's the church that helped us.
Always will help you.
Yeah.
Even the Gen Zs will help.
Their service is 24 hours. Yeah. So let me go to the canon. And Evans, Council Steve pointed out the value systems.
No, by the way,
yes,
just
allow me to go to. No, I'll come to you.
No, it is part of that.
Yes.
Because the other one, which I think maybe when you are here you don't know. The final one, which I wanted just to say on the reason why I'm critiquing this, and it must be looked at, is this issue of tourism. We have happened to go to Voi. Going to the hotels, those which Wazungu's built. Accessing them, that now is a problem. The roads are not there. Okay. So I was asking the workers there, have you ever seen the minister here before? They said they have never seen anybody there. But there were many tourists.
Okay. Yes. And Canon, talking about value systems, this is music to the ears of a political class that largely subscribes to that, is it? But from the society's foundational perspective, what should be remedied?
Quite a lot of things. Just before this this show, you ran various news bulletins. One of them was the Commission for Administrative Justice handing over their report to the President and the Cabinet Secretary, and indicated statistics around deaths on our roads. And one of the plans being instituted is putting in more cameras and all those things. Those, for me, they did not talk about corruption. They did not talk about police officers getting money and how that is cascaded all the way through the system. So we want to change the hardware, but the software is incredibly corrupt. And that is what we see in our political class. You look at that corruption being practiced and demonstrated all across cadres of leadership, whether administrative officers, civil servants, elected leaders, and all that, where you see the way monies are being channeled, are being used. you don't need to go further. Look at the Auditor General's report. Look at the corruption cases that are coming up. Look at the misuse of resources. We recently, of course, without evidence yet tabled, the Talanta Stadium, 11 billion shillings wastage and all that. So we have lost our values and our sense of dignity. Remember, Article 10 of the Constitution talks about principles of governance, which include issues of integrity, issues of sharing of power, issues of unity of the people, issues of service to the people, which is later explained in the rights of government to the people. What needs to be remedied is, I think, in my opinion, both faith actors like myself, civil societies like Wakina Musawa and the rest, we must begin to hold our leaders accountable and create frameworks for accountability. Because in my view, that is really where we lose it. Where people do wrong things, elected leaders do wrong things, then they come to our face and lie to us, then we cheer them on, and the public goes on to cheer them. As I was really saying a little earlier, even in this campaign season, we have forgotten what we were promised
before the elections
in the 2020, in the run-up to 2022. We've forgotten. But that time we were cheering and clapping and saying, yeah. But now they're coming back to make other promises again, blatant lies. How can we begin to hold people accountable? And that's why I did submit earlier that this season for me is not a season for beginning to now promise again or politic again, but to lay a framework and say, what have we done to the people? How many jobs have we created? In mature economies, they will provide numbers. They'll say, before we came to power, these are the people who are not having access to water, but today these are the people having access to water. How many jobs have we created in the informal sector? How many of our youth have now been able to transit to university education? How much has primary education been funded freely from government? We are not hearing those conversations. So the accountability framework is really what misses for me, and that must be remedied. But secondly, is really taking action, allowing the law to take its course as far as people who bend the law are concerned. You will see people in political power defending people who mishandle
public resources.
Completely. And I think, Ayub, we cannot sit back and wait.
Yeah. And Mule, in 2025, on the 10th of June, the High Court, True Justice Hedwig Ongundi, in a landmark ruling, declared political campaigns conducted outside the designated election period unconstitutional, citing violations on fundamental rights and principles enshrined in Katiba. But also, Steve pointed this out, the inability to understand roles, because there is clear distinction between what ministers could do who are drawn from parliament in the old order against now, who are supposed to be technocrats and serve all Kenyans, but their tone is different. A political class that objectifies, sexualizes women, a political class that uses language which borders on hate. I mean, how will all these things be sieved as we head into a consequential year that largely will be defined by growing youth numbers who will be making up a lion's share of the voters' bloc, and also events that have led to what we witnessed in 2024?
You know, and that's why I always underline the word bad manners, because I think it's a prevailing issue cross-cutting across in the entire spectrum of our political leadership. You know, there's a point I want to emphasize from what Steve earlier talked about in terms of, before I come to how we may need to deal with this, the question about values. You know, in the design of a house, I go back to the house analogy again. You have the walls, we have sinks, we have the washrooms and all the other things. That's a framework. I don't know whether we sit in a house and start dealing with walls, or we use a sitting room for what a sitting room is. We don't concentrate on what the wall has already been done. Yeah. It's a framework. The law is a framework. We don't concentrate so much on the laws as to what we should do within that space which has been provided. And that's the value system. When we get to our sitting rooms, we use a sitting room for the purpose of what a sitting room is. Yeah. We don't go asking, this. We can make those structural changes at some point, as Mheshimiwa is saying, but usually we use the design of a house for the purposes in which it was designed. And we adhere to the roles and responsibilities subscribed to every of the section of their house. Yeah. And I think that is what Kenyans are supposed to be doing and what our leadership is supposed to be doing, but they're not doing that. There was a moment, and this is now in terms of moving forward, and I had a session this Saturday with young people who are meeting everywhere, and I like the spirit of these young Gen Zs. I met them at the Memorial Park on Saturday. People, they're mobilizing, they are talking to each other, they're asking each other questions of what can be done. This session we are having here, they are having it on the streets, everywhere across the country. And I've been invited to a number of those sessions, and I like that thinking. Yeah. Because for some 3 months or so in 2024, after the Gen Z protests, we saw what a country can decide, how a country can decide to hold its leaders to account, and how the leaders who are under pressure to account dance to that pressure. I think that was a liberating moment for me. I'm not agitating for the chaos, but the point at which, you remember the greetings? Yeah. We want to go and greet the chief and find out what he's doing. We want to greet the MP and find out what he's doing. Kenyans need to get to a point where they ask leaders, anybody who is in positions of power, right from the villages, regional level, to the top level. That issue the provost is talking about in terms of it's a time for accountability. We need to take stock of leaders. They are supposed to be service-driven. Nobody holds those positions to go and make their own money and acquire fortunes. If by whatever providence they do get their fortunes because they have been exposed, in any case they get exposed. These are people traveling all over the world. They can get exposed, they get ideas and do big business. But you never ever elect them to go and make fortunes in those offices. Our idea is how they're going to help us in terms of progress and development, in terms of how we can be able to grow our country so that each of us can be able to have equitable share of resources of the country. Yeah. So we need, the pressure point must be at the citizen level. I think we need now to forget about this issue of discussing leaders because they have failed. I mean, if there's going to be a report card of most of these leaders, they'll score below average, all of them.
Yeah, and Mule, still on that note, because if we are to look back at the events of 2024 in June, no doubt there was the social impeachment of Parliament.
Exactly. And
we have laid blame here at the doorstep of the political establishment. But what needs to happen then at the ballot? And what then happens, all the urge that we had seen of good governance, the cabinet changes it led to, the shake-up in government. But how does that translate into the voting patterns then, and then take out the question of ethnicity from that discourse? And do you think the generational shift will be practical in 2027?
I think, and that's part of the conversations that we are having with those young people in Mitaani. The idea is, can you have them take advantage of the opportunity that presents itself in an election? Why in a democratic country we have periodic elections, regular and periodic elections, is because it offers you another opportunity to be able to do some change, some transitions, based on what you've been able to see or been able to establish from the previous administration and the previous leadership. So we are it's unfortunate that if you look at the numbers of those who are registering right now, very many young people are not. They have not registered in good numbers. And that's part of the agitation that we are having right now, so that we can have as many young people coming over. Of course, young leaders and the youth present an opportunity for changes in this country. They're younger, they are much. This country is going to belong to them more than it belongs to some of us. I mean, the number of years that people who are in their 60s and 70s have, and the number of years somebody in their 20s have, is very clear who has the stakes higher in terms of the future of the country. So if these young people involve themselves in the political process, in the election process especially, in the registration process, but then also put their minds in terms of assessing what the current leadership has been able to deliver for them, they should be able to make the right changes in 2027.
Yes, well, I think this is the right time to say mine is to echo what Mule has said. I'm surprised I didn't get the provost's comment on this when he spoke, and I still want to provoke him to...
Your provost.
Yes, to respond to this.
Yeah.
I hope the Constitution rests on 4 pillars, and 1 pillar remains unattended to. The first pillar is this robust framework, without which this conversation would not even be possible. The second pillar is a robust, independent, and functional judiciary. And you've seen the judiciary playing its part, I think, satisfactorily. The third pillar, which is always the niggling challenge, is political goodwill, without which the political wing of government cannot deliver on its mandate. The third one is public vigilance. Public vigilance is grounded in Article 3 of the Constitution, because the Constitution says, or joins all of us, to proactively defend its core promises. And part of those promises is the accountability, transparency in governance, service delivery, avoiding the need to manipulate those offices for partisan political gain. But what is paradoxical is that we tend to lean back on the oppressor or the violator for protection. Frederick Douglass, a leading U.S. civil rights activist, once said, you cannot make a moral appeal to your oppressor. This lack of political hygiene is wholly accountable to elected leadership, attributable to elected leadership. The need to sanitize our politics and governance then will be created by a system that exists outside that contaminated space. And this is where the church comes in, and religious groups. They are the custodians of our value system. There is a confluence of the law and morality. The moral aim of the law is to ensure that there's cohesion and unity in the country, and we minimize instances of extreme disparation. So every government elected is supposed to be service-driven. Okay. Now, that moral aim of the law is not the exclusive role of lawyers and judges and political elite. I think if we recalibrate our priorities, you will see that religious organizations, such as the clergy, they play a more central and visible role in bringing political stability and unity in the country. Because as the church can speak very definitively about some of these things. And the good thing is, we are a country that is intensely religious. Most of us are Christians or Muslims. There's a very small minority that do not believe in any faith. How about we weigh on that majority that subscribes to a particular faith, and that faith has some, like for instance, for us Christians, there's what my provost tells me is the Christian doctrinal teachings that is supposed to guide my decisions. I think listening to him at the pulpit can have better effect than listening to a politician, because there is no short-term political interest or gain that he intends to extract. You get? So I can listen to his voice and pay more attention to what he says than a political elite. So I think we need to redirect the spotlight to people that can drive the conversation for better public good and better outcomes. And I was hoping that the provost would comment on that, because I want us to minimize, as we go towards the election, Ayub, I want us to minimize over-reliance on the law. Mule got it right. You have a structure, of a framework. We are now in this room. How about we maximize the opportunities that this room provides to us? Instead of thinking, punch the wall and see how strong that structural integrity is. When no one is actually threatening the integrity of the structure. How about we have a conversation that deepens our commitment to the things we should be doing once we are in this room? So we are in this government for a period of 5 years, all of us, not a section of it. What is it that this government should be doing? And what is it that the clergy can do to ensure that this government delivers on its mandate? I think that is the pressing issue.
And just before Provost comes in, just a word, just what I've added to what Steve is saying because of the Provost. According to all recent surveys, the religious fraternity is the most trusted by Kenyans. I'm just adding that so that we put a layer of weight down to the Provost in terms of the response.
Also, talking about its influence, if we are to look at events around the Great Lakes region, especially the Democratic Republic of the Congo, the Catholic Church was so influential in the transition when Joseph Kabila had planned to hold on to power, and therefore leading to the transition towards the current presidency. Yes, Yusuf, on you then. As a country, are we placing a lot of premiums on politicians whose actions nonetheless has no value or substance in terms of economic or social contribution to the country?
You know, Ayub,
being a politician.
In fact, what I want to tell you is that, you know, everything that is said here is generating something very interesting.
A discourse. Yeah.
You know, my brother here has mentioned, okay, there are many words, but one of them that has got a lot of sense to me is this thing of values. That's why you find people, if you Google and find, you know, people have done even studies on what you mean by value systems. You know, it all depends on what we put values on. And something has just come to my mind. When we reach a stage, when you call this kind of meeting that we are seeing, and then people are able to decide not to attend those meetings. Because I've seen some cases where people will, if they were to be able to abstain, then maybe somebody can see sense. But I don't know whether it is because of, and you know, Kenya is all, people behave differently. If I look at the politics, from the place where I come from, there are some instances which you can't believe, that money which we intended that should go and pay. Today, government, somebody is talking about capitation. You know, we are lacking what we call institutional memory. We lack institutional memory in government. Because even I think, you know what we saw ourselves when we went to the civil service, the code of regulation, which was there. You know, because of the changes, the people have come to those offices, the big offices, like OP. Somebody comes there, and he comes and installs his own system of doing things. So those things were there, that people are supposed to obey that, even things to do with secrets in your office. You know, it was a serious offense. But you know, with the changes that have taken place, and mainly because of politics, because somebody comes with politics that, you know, have got more numbers and must push for this. And that's where the problem is. So the church, the way we have said, there is something that I would like the church to do. They can take whatever, because, you know, even myself, as a Muslim, you know, I did not learn the Bible because of my late grandfather. That's a different story, because of how he became a Muslim. But I've went to know a lot about what is preached, because when I go to interact with people, and it means very well. I just want them to remain, because I've helped to build churches even in Viga, and so on, and mosques and so on. But it was not for the purpose of influencing what the church should do. It was the followers coming to see me and telling me that, you know, we don't have, look, this place is mud. We don't even have benches and so on. So it was for the good
of the community.
Of the community and the church. And I want them to maintain that. I don't want them to get, because you see, I've seen sometimes, you know, things come in big ways and you don't know. Because there's a church, I think it is in Karen, where there was a lady, I don't know what she did. So I'm just seeing for now, that's where I think we are, because as of now, you know, you can't stop what is going on right now. Because what you saw here on TV, somebody must go and challenge it. And this is the reason why I'm saying that my brother was talking about judiciary. But I've got a lot of reservations. Right now, when I went to University of Nairobi, quite a while ago, you know, we were able to quote when we were learning, because I was in this ADD, but we were learning elements of law, because, you know, you involve yourself in contracts, like projects like which I've been involved in. You know, you enter, so you have to learn that law. The poor there that time, they were able to quote from the British, the English law, some of the past cases, and they were using them to teach us. I'm wondering today, in this country, if there is any case that we can quote today to people like ourselves, that you are teaching us, you are teaching us what to do.
Okay.
Because, judgments are made, this one is made this way, this one is made this way. I saw something very painful last night. There are these teachers, I don't know what they are doing to children. There's a judge who has gone ahead and made a death sentence. One of the teachers, I think, was involved in rape and so on. But I saw some guys coming out again, coming to say that, that is not being human. So I saw some yesterday again, where there's a school where children are, I think, these ones who are incapacitated.
Yeah.
And you find somebody going to defend that. So I think there is a little bit more we know.
The moral question.
Yes. Yeah. That moral question, I've seen a situation where money, which is meant to pay fees for CDF, yes, that money is not given. Somebody does a classroom, which is supposed to be done with 500,000, renovation. I give you a contract for 2.5 million, I pay you 2.5 million. You return to me, you take your 500 when I pay you, yeah, you return to me 500,000.
2 million.
And then you remain with 2 million, and you can give me a commission from that. That is the money now that is used on the eve of election, okay, 150 shillings. Yeah. So this is what I'm saying. I think these guys who are here, particularly the three of them, I think they need to think very seriously so that we come up saying that we want to change the Quran and be very specific about what. Look at what happened. The World Bank and IMF, when Moi was looking for aid, they insisted that we must have ethics and anti-corruption, and we must reform the former CID, yeah, to DCI. This thing the president was talking about yesterday, where we are saying about traffic, I think someone has mentioned something very interesting here. Yeah. You see, those are the poor supposed to deal with that. Okay. Because when you find so many policemen on the road in the morning, I'm sorry to say this, they are not looking for how to control it. They are looking for you to make a mistake so that they can take some money from you. Yeah.
the moral fabric is what he questions.
Yeah, the moral fabric is what is on the altar.
If we were to do a soul searching, how much ground will you cover?
I think it's broken potentially to the core. Yeah. Way over 80% is broken. I think the conversation that I'm hearing here, Ayub and our fellow listeners, for me revolve around many things, but I can mention two of them. One, I mean, this whole thing of the collapse of our values and the pattern the politics has taken in this country. Two things. One is a disempowered population. Disempowered in the sense of very high levels of poverty and inability to make ends meet. That makes people extremely vulnerable to the sense that whatever they're promised, whatever comes their way, they'll prioritize food for that day. They'll prioritize their children having access to healthcare. They'll prioritize burying their kin. A member of parliament giving them 10,000 shillings to bury their kin. They do not care about values. So I think one, that disempowerment is a big thing, and for some reason it tends to work for the politician. Mm-hmm. And the politician will want to maintain that status quo, to allow that to remain, so that, and that in my view, that my hypothesis in terms of the political class not able to help us grow this country is drawn from that hypothesis that if we empower them, then they'll become more educated, more aware, then they will not listen to us, they'll not follow us, they'll not chant whether it's 1 term or 2 term. They'll now begin to make more informed decisions. So a disempowered populace is a prey and a beautiful building, harvesting ground for the
And Canon, while you point that out, which is the perpetual continuity that politicians do enjoy as holding the trump card, but how much has education played, as a safeguard here, as a breaking point? Because if you look at how...
I'm coming to that.
Yeah, to that point, yes.
I'm coming
Ideally,
to that.
Is it a solution?
I'm coming to that. Because as I come to that, then the second thing for me, apart from a disempowered population, is the tribalization of our politics. Our politics is structured around tribe. And you don't need... Go begin doing analysis of all elections. Every year in election, people vote tribally. From 1992 all the way. The pattern is so clear. So education that you're asking about in terms of ability to make informed decisions, in my view, seems not to have really made so much a difference. With due respect to people who've been elected, you've seen the very same educated people.
Yeah.
If you look at the kind of people they're electing, you wonder, what did education then not do to this person? Even as we speak, the conversations about electing certain people, the campaign that you're talking about, which is a subject today, leading up to 2027, people who are on the front line, people who are on the ballot, people with incredible integrity issues. There are those who have even killed people, have shot people, yet they are the favorites, even of the educated people like you and me and Steve and the rest here. And so I want to ask, what is education not doing to us that makes us to really be a prey to a tribal way of politics and not want to hold people accountable? Back to the national, to the values issue, yes. Really briefly, I think from our end, we have tried to do the much we can, but the population that we lead is also trapped in those two things that I'm mentioning. But you look at the way the church has tried. I know there's a section of the church that has fairly compromised, but you look at what key people have done. You know, Archbishop Gitari, the late, who is a great icon of faith and politics, as far as theology and politics is concerned, was very courageous. You know, he would set out and say, today I'm going to arrest police officers who are taking bribe on the road. And he will marshal his clergy and people around and go to a road top and say, I'm arresting you today. And they'll disappear. And for me, I think my religious colleagues or faith actors, if I may broadly call it so, we must be courageous enough to point out to the people, these are the correct values. Notwithstanding the things that I've mentioned, we must say, this is how we must do things. Includes voter education, includes really re-emphasis on our values. When people steal, when people kill, when people abuse power, we must call them out and really demand them to be held accountable, whether they're judges, whether they're along cadres of life. But then I believe we have a role, and we must be courageous enough because we've pushed. Look at, for example, All Saints Cathedral, where I lead, the critical role we played in the 2024 Unpopular Finance Bill thing and the Gen Z uprising. We stood up, we called out critical things, and we are happy that at that time, our voice contributed to the voices of many disgruntled Kenyans, and there were changes. I want to ask faith actors on this show, let us be courageous enough, let us be bold, let us not take money from this hand and then begin to preach something different from the other hand. Let us stand on the values that are right, that we are called for as faith actors. Yeah, and
Mule, building up on that point, certainly stakeholder engagement is pertinent, is it, to course correct the political trajectory of our country, certainly. There seems no hope on parliament and parliamentarians, and this is not a broad brush painting of the political elite. But what comes from parliament is largely digested with no confidence on the part of the public. How much does ELOC, the church, and the other voices of the Kenyan people contribute to redirection of the country towards the right way?
I think for me, it's a very clear direction. In the quest for the so-called second liberation, there's a very serious conspiracy of these other actors you've talked about. The church leadership, we all know, when you mention Timothy Njoya and others, you start seeing the influx of so many, whether it was even from the Muslim point of view, the Christians, they were all at the center of the struggle, and they worked very closely with the civil society, they worked with academia, they worked with different experts in different fields to be able to create an agitation. What we need to add now, the fodder that we need to add now, is this younger generation who seem much more clearer. You know, we talked about education and as the fact that it doesn't seem to be liberating. It may be generational, because if you listen to these younger people and some of them who professing to have good and quality education, which makes them understand what a katiba means or what responsibilities in office means, and asking the right questions in matatus and in the streets and in all the other pockets of existence.
Even translating the finance bill.
Yeah, exactly. That finance bill story analogy is the best you can ever offer in terms of the agency of the citizen and how you can be able to work to get closely with the citizen to be able to bring change to the country. So I think for me, moving forward, is this conspiracy that is required. We have people who are trusted. We have the churches, the church leader, the religious leadership, which is trusted in this country, based on, of course, the surveys that have been conducted. And then we have all these actors. We have experts. We have former politicians. There is a conspiracy of actors who are out there who intend well for this country and who can be able to be moved in this, at this point, especially in time, because now we're just about a year to the election, to create agitation for change, which could create a groundswell across the country. The opportunity is existing. All the right ingredients have already been in place because of what we have seen over this particular tenure. Young people rising up, issues being raised, pertinent issues about what government means or governance means and what politics is. I think they have been unraveled. So now we have an opportunity where if we get the right leadership and if all actors come together, that's what we are doing ourselves. That's why ELOG decided to go to the streets. We are producing information around the elections, but who is listening? We need to get out there and talk to everybody and talk to them about what are the findings are and what the issues are. So basically, from where I sit, there's an opportunity here. And if we harvest the groundswell, especially by the youth movement, and then we bring all these other tried and tested actors together, they take the leadership and create platforms for those changes, chances are we may just redeem ourselves in the coming year.
Yeah, and Steve, talking about the state of the referee ahead of the next elections, I mean, what are the lessons they go and the lesson they carry into the defining election year, into a defining election year? And does 2027 represent a break with the past? I mean, if you look at the political elite today and the establishment, largely these are the political proteges of the former Kanu regime and boys who served therein. And what does the future represent after 2027?
Well, I think, insofar as IEBC is concerned, the greatest impediment to the independence of the Commission is the political actors themselves. IEBC's main challenge is external, not internal. Because if you look at what the Supreme Court and the election courts have said, elections are generally managed well. But as they say, if you want to kill a dog, give it a bad name. So when you defund, delegitimize IEBC, then anything IEBC does would not make sense to you. And I think this is just to say to Kenyans that we have to have faith in the Commission and trust its mandate, but also join amplify the Commission's calls. Remember, Ayub, we were all here when the Commission told us that the timeline for delimitation of boundaries was fast expiring on 4th March 2024. No, 2024. Yeah. 4th March 2024. And the Chebukati Commission had even done some groundwork, but it decried lack of funding. Treasury in the past administration was not just prioritizing delimitation of boundaries. There are a lot of post-election activities, and Mule is well versed with this, that IB is supposed to do. But some of these have a budget component, and Treasury does not want to release the funds. So then, I think if Kenyans paid attention to what the communication that comes from IEBC, you'd be able to see very clearly that IEBC's core problem is external, and it relates to just a rogue political elite that does not want IEBC to operate independently. But there's something quite important. You permit me to just develop this comment from what the Provost said. He made a very profound statement on how to address the problem by characterizing it correctly, that if you have a disempowered population, they will be disenfranchised, and then they'll be demoralized, and those people cannot hold the political elite accountable. But it also makes it extremely difficult to sensitize those people, because in my research work, because I do a lot of work, research and reading and writing on campaign generally, the rational choice theory more or less corresponds very well with what the Provost says, because it says voters tend to prioritize candidates or politicians. Voters tend to prefer candidates or politicians who prioritize solving their short-term problems, immediate needs, as they work on longer programmatic interventions. So what we consider as corrosion of our values, corruption, cash handouts, and so on and so forth, to voters, this is a welcome social assistance program. That if somebody is dead or a child lacks school fees and a leader comes through, I will tend to revere that leader, remember him at the ballot, and vote for him. And politicians are minding this. Yeah. The solution, therefore, is not to feel discouraged and demoralized entirely, but to keep speaking to the challenges that make it difficult for Kenyans to hold the government of the day accountable. Okay. If we are aware that we are vulnerable and politicians are milking our vulnerability, that alone, that awareness alone, makes us capable of receiving that social assistance and but acting differently. Yeah. You know, so I think that was quite profound. It's a conversation that needs to be developed.
All right.
Yeah.
And which, of course, needs a paradigm shift away from the psychological, for example, tendency that the political class weaved together in addressing the short-term issues instead of the long-term, which needs policies and interventions that are also very strategic. So let's look at the feedback here on the broadcast, gentlemen. The hashtag on X is Citizen Daybreak. The SMS code is 22422 at Citizen TV Kenya and at Ayub Abdikadir. Engineer Lazaro says early campaigns diverts attention away from service delivery and we risk ending up with stalled projects as a devoted St. Michael ACK Kariobangi member. I'm very concerned about the ongoing divisive politics. Frank says the country is slipping into campaign mode far too early. Instead of focusing on jobs, cost of living and service delivery, leaders are sharpening rhetoric and deepening divisions. When politics becomes permanent, governance, service and citizens lose. Bob says political elite operates under impunity and status quo. That's why Kenya is becoming a campaigning nation mad with violence after every 5 years and cycle of elections. Kipegon says it's structural impunity. Look at how politicians are busy campaigning on car rooftops while elections are a year away. Leaders think about the welfare of the people. Politicians think about the next elections. We should hold them accountable. Godi says the church must rise above partisan interest and offer moral clarity in our highly charged political climate. It should resist inducements, no matter how generous, that compromise its prophetic voice or silence its duty to speak the truth. Remy says for Kenya to truly thrive, we need to reclaim the space between elections. We need a political culture that respects the boundaries of the election calendar, prioritizes governance over campaigns, and holds leaders accountable. Gentlemen.
I just wanted to say something about the last one.
30 seconds.
I wanted to say something, which I think the provost do this for us, and other churches, and I think you can lead. Yeah. You know the Bible and the Quran and so on, these religious books, you know they have put all these things which have happened in the past, they are quoted in the Bible. I would like the preaching to be based on that. And tell, you know, I've been saying myself, where I come from in Viga, I've told the pastors myself that if it was a matter of going to hell, they will be the first ones to go to Nineveh. I want them to preach and give examples. Preach and give examples of this kind of things, because there is no other person who can do this now, because, you know, we are all different. If you look at Mount Kenya, people, they behave differently. If you look at the coast of people, behave differently. So if you can take it down so that the pastors, let them preach and give examples. Say that, you know, somebody who's tall was treated like this. Somebody who did this was... So that they can...
I'm sure there's a lot the very Reverend has taken down as part of his next sermon.
Otherwise, I think this is a very good program, so that our people can behave and continue doing more of this.
Many thanks for your also intellect and the input you have given us here on the broadcast, gentlemen. Much appreciated. We are out of time.
Thank you.
Mule Musau is coordinator with the Election Observation Group. Ilob Yusuf Chancellor, former Member of Parliament, also joined this morning by the very Reverend Canon Evans Omolo, Provost at the All Saints Cathedral here in Nairobi, and Steve Ogola, Counsel and an Advocate of the High Court. Many thanks for your time, appreciated. And thanks to you too for waking up with us here on the broadcast. Many thanks for the feedback. I will see you tomorrow morning here at the same time. Till then, good morning.